Okay, so moving on, let's move on to the Fighter Mafia segment that we have. Joshua, do you want to get started on this? I think we have couple videos that we want to show here real quick, and you and I can kind of comment on those. Let Jagling get these videos up and running for us. So, and this is thanks to some of the fleet security and S3 guys we have at ADI that helped put this training video together. So, Josh, you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about what our thoughts are on Fighter Mafia?
Yeah, so first of all, it's really great to work with these guys. We have an amazing crew that's been really, really dedicated. And, working with Star Citizen, we're talking about the perspective of being in a big organization and working together. And what we have been able to accomplish is to take the things we've talked about before on this show with what we went through last episode with what we see when we take pilots and try to get them to fly together and some of the advances they get for their first and second training time. This is taking it to another level of teamwork where we're actually getting ships to work in a coordinated fashion and trying to understand what that means and be able to be effective and use that, I guess, our numbers to our advantage. And what we found is that there is some really significant advantages. It takes some good skills and some things we'll talk about, but this has been, Star Citizen is a great game, and visually, I don't think I've played anything quite as stunning as when you walk out on one of the stations above the planet and you see the planet and it's all tilted and the sun's coming up. I mean, it's just amazing. But Star Citizen in itself, some of the gameplay isn't ready yet. It's still a game in development. And so it's hard to get and sustain all the excitement you could possibly have after 7 years. No offense, right? But doing this really has reinvigorated my thoughts and thinking and made Star Citizen super fun. So if you're looking for a challenge, this is definitely where I found a new one, and I've been enjoying it a lot. What has been your thoughts, Jay?
Well, I think that as we look at this and talk about it, the great thing about being in an organization is you have people to play with, and group play and learning how to work together with people, and fighting against people and using, quantity is its own quality, at the end of the day, is one of the advantages of being in a big org that has a lot of active people, and you get to learn a lot of stuff. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this particular test, and we're just using these videos as examples. But I can say that the testing here was against probably one of the better known pilots in ADI who has won some Star Citizen PvP competitions in Europe. And this was us testing tactics that we should be able to, this tactic should work very well against probably all but maybe the top 50 or 100 fighter pilots out there, two versus one. 4 versus 1, it probably would take out virtually
anybody.
Yeah. So,
well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when we talk about Star Citizen, there's a lot of examples of why a large organization or an organization in general is to your advantage. They've said that if you're going to operate in uncontrolled space, there's probably more financial reward for that. But you're going to have things like fuel for your ships and starfarers and different types of support. So we know that teamwork is going to be there. And this is one of those examples of being able to protect all that work and your assets. And yes, what we have found is that, two pilots working together is a very, very strong force. And we've seen a lot of videos of people showing solo fighting and, in Arena Commander and doing some of the things that works there. But I think we're going to be able to use our size and force and teamwork to our advantage. I really do.
Yeah, and teamwork is the way to go. I mean, at the end of the day, I feel bad for guys that it's only them or them and one other buddy. It's hard really to experience all the different aspects of the game if you're by yourself. What do you think, Jolly, on teamwork and this kind of fighter mafia tactic that we're taking in with the fleet security guys?
There's an advantage to it. The problem is training for it. It's easy to go out and train solo. You do it anytime you want to.
Yep.
It's not difficult at all. but you have to schedule out, plan out, and coordinate or get team training done. We can do it. It's not a problem to be able to get it done. I just realize a little more extra effort is needed. A little more extra commitment is required.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And building a training program that's scalable for an org is not an easy task. It's, lots of man hours have to go into optimizing that kind of training so that when the time comes, you can, roll out that training and teach a couple hundred people, 300-400 people how to do this.
Well, and even though we've learned this, now we got to break it down into individual segments for training and try to, like you said, apply it to the larger group or at least the section of fleet security. So that alone is going to take some time. And, I'm looking forward to that challenge, but I think that's going to be a big one.
It is. Turing, what are your thoughts now that you're the official head of fleet security?
Well, I can tell you that, first off, I'm extremely proud for the guys. There's a couple of them that Josh, you can chime in, but I would say that they didn't have a lot of experience
Nope.
when you first started, and through constant practice, direction, revectoring of what you wanted to accomplish, you see the results, and the opposition pilot they went against, gave them high praise, which was very much deserved. The challenge is going to be, how do we take this, which is really the end product of where you want to be? This is the elite tactic that you want to have at the end, and layer cake that so that you build, you build toward having a cadre that you can call upon, and a cadre that will turn around and be able to train the next group and the next group and the next group. So, we'll be taking this and breaking it down into the segments and making it so that right now, whatever training program you have has to be both resilient, so that when the new alpha patches come out, that what you're building is not dependent upon the specific game mechanic that you're experiencing during that build, because it may change. And it has to be scalable to a large size organization. But it's a fantastic start, and look forward to doing it.
Well, and to that effect, what I'd like to say is that we do have a great group of guys, and it's amazing to work with them, and they deserve a lot of praise for that. But these guys had no real flight sim experience, no real combat experience. And when I first went up against them, I just started using some thinking stuff, because they were better at flying than I was in Star Citizen, to try to show them some different things. And, that's the encouraging part, is that these guys have gone from not a lot of experience to doing this in a relatively short time. Now, I'm going to put them on a higher end than average of competency and dedication and desire. So I think those things help. But I think your average person in Star Citizen, given the right format and path, can achieve this pretty straightforward. I think your average pilot can do it.
Yeah, I think you'll be able to, if we look at the approach that we want to take, which is, first you need the mastery of flight itself. You got to be able to learn how to fly the ship in such a way that you're not thinking necessarily about how you're operating the craft. It's muscle memory on how to do it, from the very beginning. You add on top of that your communication and your brevity pieces that you need. And then once you've mastered that piece of it, you're a master of flight for that ship that you're flying, then you can move on to become the master of combat that you want. You introduce those tactics, because you don't have to learn how to fly the aircraft at that point, or spacecraft at that point. You just learn how to do the tactic. So it's a layered approach to building that skill set. And then once you've achieved that, you turn around and you find 2 or 3 other guys that you bring in, and you start building that, and it quickly morphs from 4 to 8 to 16 to 32, and they're up. Will
Sounds like a
everybody be at
pyramid
this
scheme.
level? Yeah, well, my middle name is Ponzi, but
I mean, the one thing I would throw in here, Turing, is I interviewed all these guys after seeing the video, and the 2 main guys that did this, and I just didn't ask their permission to name them, so I'm not going to. But the 2 main guys, from start to finish to this point, was about 20 hours each, but that included theory crafting with leadership,
Right.
then going in game and actually developing the tactics, and then theory, working, figuring out from the theory crafting to actual usability.
Right.
And then finally, implementing it and tuning it. The two other folks that kind of tagged on at the end, it only took them about 6 hours to get up to speed and are almost as good as the first two.
And I would say the critical thing, Jay, is it's kind of like when we talked about with the profiles. It's not trying to figure out how you're going to do it. It's figuring out what you're going to do because you already have the how worked out. And so they can think about how to apply those tools in the fight. And all 4 of them are up to that speed already.
Yep. So, the one thing that I'll point out in this that most people aren't going to notice is that there's no strafing, for all practical, no blind strafing occurring by the attackers. And the other person is strafing. The other person is a dual HOSAS or whatever you would call it, dual stick pilot who is very good on his own, but against 2 or more dedicated attackers, he's just not able to hold up. And against 4, they slaughter him in 3 or 4 minutes. And he's a very, he's won some in-person tournaments in Europe for Star Citizen. So he's not a bad pilot.
Yeah.
And that, no,
stretch.
and that's again the teamwork. And speaking of which, we looked at what it takes to make this work, right? Teamwork makes the dream work. And I kind of broke down some wingman skills, and I'd like to put them, I think these are in order. We can debate them, but I want you to notice where weapons is. And it's not number 1, because number 1, I think, is speed control. Got to be able to have the ability to control your speed. We're going to talk about this a little bit more at the end here with dual sticks and what that means. Staying in position is another key that requires some situational awareness to what your lead pilot is doing. Maybe trying to get an anticipation of that by understanding where your target is. Your energy management. So, making sure that you don't end up in a low speed situation or too much speed. We are certainly seeing that speed affects accuracy. And then right after that is comms, being able to communicate what you're doing, identify what the bad guy is doing, and talk about what you guys need to do as a group to counter that. And then finally, we're going to get to weapons, which is 5th on the list, because all those things come together, and then you get into the shooting part. And then lastly, managing your shields. We are seeing that that's something that's important, whether that's moving them around or just realizing that you're being hit too much and you got to disengage.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Nam?
I'll start by saying that I'm really a novice. I still consider myself a novice when it comes to this stuff. I listen to you guys. I love this. Try to absorb what I can. But all I can say is I see the value in it from the point of view of somebody who considers themselves new to all of it. It's like Jay said earlier, feels bad for the guy who's in it by himself or with one other person. You don't get the full experience in the game. They haven't generally given us very, very good tools for operating as a team.
No.
But you can make do.
Yeah.
Yep.
You
Okay.
can make do with the current ones.
Yep.
Shepcap, what are your thoughts after seeing this?
Well, personally, I am admittedly not much of a fighter pilot. I'm more of a my play style is more of a up close brawler. You know what I mean? Like I'm the guy who flies the freelancer miss and just lays into you and hopes to destroy you in the first run.
Launches 12 missiles at once.
Yeah, well,
Just spend that money.
Yeah. But to echo what everybody else has been saying here, I think that you can't put enough value on training and knowing what to train. And just circling back to being in an org that provides these things. I've played plenty of games with semi-realistic consequences for dying. Like you lose all your stuff. People take all your junk. You got to go back to wherever you start. And being a lone wolf in a game like that is very difficult because, as we can see here, um, even if you're the best shooter in the game, if 5 idiot shooters attack you at once, like you just can't win the fight. And then if they have better tactics, then just forget about it. It's game over. So,
Shep, do you think from seeing this and what we're talking about, if you were to enter into, say, trying to achieve this yourself, do you think it'd be overwhelming?
no, I think with the right training protocols, I could get into it. It's all about putting time into it.
Yeah.
The brevity I'm pretty good on. I picked up on that back in the days we used to do Friday night flights. I'd have a laminated list sitting on my desk next to me, and I would look at it while I was flying around before I'd make calls.
And
I think
you
my
memorized it.
exactly rote memorization. I think my biggest hang up on being able to necessarily fly like this is I just love my mouse and keyboard. I'm not ready to go to HOTAS yet. Maybe someday. Maybe someday I'll add it in. Yeah, I've come close to getting, believe it or not, just a throttle, because I find a throttle easier to control to set a speed. But I'm just not there personally for me yet. Maybe in the future I'll get there, but I'm not. Like I said, I'm more of a stormtrooper kind of guy. I spend a lot of time running around the ground with guns and driving vehicles. So, but I think with the right equipment and the right training team and enough time, you can accomplish anything, especially in a video game.
Well, and sorry, go ahead, Jolly.
No, one thing I wanted to bring up. Finish off your conversation with Shap first, though.
Sure.
Oh no, I just wanted his perspective on it because I come from a different perspective, and I think when we're talking about trying to train it, understanding what somebody who's never really done anything like this thinks is helpful. So I just wanted to hear what he had to say. That's all.
Absolutely helpful, and I think the way we're going about it is great. And again, benefit of a big org.
Yeah.
I was going to bring up, Josh, you mentioned energy management, which is in real life, that's very, very true. It's all about kinetic and potential energy, or airspeed and altitude. Those don't carry over to the game, though, because we don't really care about altitude when you're in space.
No,
so it's all just kinetic energy and controlling kinetic energy, whether, as you said, I'm going too fast, too slow. Am I using all my kinetic energy right now, or do I have reserve kinetic energy, meaning I can speed up even further if I need to? That's just a little change as opposed to those who are used to playing flight simulators, World War II or modern-day flight simulators, a different type of EM than what we're used to.
it is, and now EM also affects accuracy, at least of weapons and missiles.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different application of EM that I knew they had talked about. The distances had changed and something about the SEM speed and what would happen, but actually getting in there and digging into it, it's a whole new world of thinking about it.
Yep, I agree.
So Josh, let's talk about the furball complexities. What are the problems when you enter into a fight like this that the pilots are having to focus on?
So, I think you talked before about having a bucket, and as a new pilot, you got a small bucket. And as you get used to all of the different things and operating the systems and just oriented to flying, your bucket gets bigger over time. Well, when you start adding more enemies and you start having more teammates, that bucket starts to fill up really fast, trying to keep track of where they are, being maybe just your wingman versus the enemies. I know even just keeping track of your shield and what state they're in, and even where fire is coming from sometimes if there's more than one bad guy. So your bucket can fill up really fast and it can get overwhelming. And I think it's something that's going to take a lot of practice. And I'm sure us, as well as other orgs and individuals, are going to struggle with that for a while. The bigger that furball gets, I think the worse that's going to be. So I think there's going to be some real challenges that lead into things like deconfliction and running into each other. We had some collisions in doing some of this training. None blue v blue, thank God. But there was still some collisions, and so trying to work through that. Some of the other challenges is trying to figure out where to focus your fire. Do you try to take out both ships? Do you try to focus on one of the enemies? Do you divide it between them? There's some questions that come up and things happen really fast. SCM may only be 230 SCM. Yeah, but you're talking, meters per second, but you're talking about speeds that are, almost near the speed of sound, right? So it's moving really, really quick in real time. And so next is, coming into concise comms. When you listen to the comms and the 2v2, it's casual and they're talking through it and they've got lots of time where they can say little comments. When it gets into a bigger furball, those comments become harder to get out because you're processing so much that bucket's getting full fast and you're trying to think of what to say. And by the time you say it, things have changed so fast because you have not just 2, 4, or 6, but you could have like 8 moving pieces at one time. So it gets really, really dynamic, really fast. And I think there's a lot of room for confusion in that mess. I really do.
Hey, Josh, if I could jump in real quick,
Yeah.
what do you see comms wise? What do you see fall off the edge first? Like, what do people stop calling first? Do they stop marking targets? Do they stop calling ordnance going out? What do you see fall off the quickest?
I think they just stop talking in general.
Oh, just shut down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Usually just don't stop. They just usually
Until there's a
shut down,
splash, and then they say
Yeah.
splash so and then
Yeah.
you're right back in it. Yeah.
They become task saturated and stop talking. It's usually what
People
happens.
get real tiny. And they just yeah.
Well,
and for the flight lead that can be deadly for the group. You have
it
to.
can be.
Do you see tunnel vision? Do you see tunnel vision, Josh?
Oh yeah.
It's funny. When I first started working with this group, they were better at flying as a lead and wingman. And the first time I tried to just follow and just be a good wingman, it probably took me 3 or 4 rounds to really understand the positioning I needed to be, when to, use the energy management or speed to be in the right position to support and to fire. And during those things, while they're communicating and they're talking about stuff and going on, I was a little lost. So yeah, it was a little tunnel vision, but it just takes a matter of time and focus. And then once I started mastering those little pieces, I could start thinking about the big picture. So yeah, tunnel vision can happen really, really quickly. I'm sure, Jolly, you've probably had some experience or comments on this.
Target fixation is normally what we'd call it, where, for example, you're coming to a target you're trying to engage, and you're just looking at your target, focusing so much on that, you forget everything else that's around you. That's your kind of calling. Me, tunnel vision is I'm losing my vision, but
Yeah.
the
Target fixation.
target fixation is what I'm more used to.
Yeah, and when I was trying to, be a good wingman, I was fixated on my lead. I couldn't engage in the fight right away because I'm trying to master that first step.
Yeah,
In
you're
this
trying
case,
to maintain
lead
your
fixation.
situation.
Good point, Josh.
You're trying
Yeah.
to maintain where you are in position. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
had to build a bigger bucket before I could start to be involved.
The thing is, not everybody's going to be able to go to red flag right off, because this is really like, red flag. I mean, you're really going to the end there, and so that's why it's key to build a stepping stone approach. It doesn't have to be a lot of stones. I thoroughly agree. You don't have to have this is not a 5-step, 12-step process to get to the end. I think it's very quick for most people. Most people that we have been involved in flying in this game for a little bit of time. So,
Yep.
It's really just getting them comfortable and confident that they can do it. And I know they can do it. If you give it with repetition, you boil it down to what's important. You get like, I call it the 80% solution, but you always want to be 100% right, because you're going to get killed if you're not. But if you build enough repetition and confidence, then they'll feel better, and they'll be able to catch on. Most of the people are going to be able to do this, I think, rather quickly.
For anyone that doesn't know, Red Flag is a big military exercise where they put all the moving pieces together from the ground troops to the fighters, and it's a big, big deal. And that's where you really go to show off your craft and how well you are at it.
Yeah, but it's also like what Jay was saying earlier. Red Flag is also coming back at the end of the day and watching the tapes and talking it and debriefing it out and learning from that. That's really a major part of doing the Red Flag, is that you're building it on day by day. You're learning from your mistakes, so to speak, so you don't make them again.
Well, and you said something critical about it's a skill you learn and it's perishable. And while we're not going to share all of the details, even if we did share the details, if you went and mastered it and you didn't keep proficient, it ain't going to matter, because things are just happening so fast and in real time, you just can't do it. And so I think one of the keys to this is going to be consistent dedication and flying. I know you've talked about potentially doing more consistent things with FleetSec in this arena. And I think those things are going to be critical for us to be successful and to maintain this and spread it through the larger segment of FleetSec.
Yes, being able to offer practice time, being able to begin to integrate, these tactics into our org operations, introducing some reality into what's happening, some surprise, some you can't, you just get into a routine right now, and it's just not fun. You have to make it fun and challenging, but it's just like being it's like being a surgeon. If you're not doing surgery, you begin to lose your
Skill
ability
sets
to do
atrophy.
surgery.
Yep.
High speed, high echelon fighter pilots, you've got to go out and do it. But you don't have to have everybody doing it all the time. Is what I'm saying. You can't have something where you've got 500-600 people trying to shove through the pipeline.
No,
we don't need 500 or 600 people through that pipeline. I think we're going to be able to build it so that we begin to build enthusiasm, and people will want to come and do this type of training.
well, and once they learn it, they can go use it and apply it, and that in itself is going to maintain
Right.
proficiency.
Right. I mean, we're doing this to build the training that we need during our org operations, but it also gives you survivability when you're just playing out there by yourself too.
Yep. Real quick shout out to Snek SC for the follow. Thank you very much. And let's the big thing here that I would stress is that it's the deconfliction, the situational awareness bucket is the hardest thing to teach, and you have to focus on learning your basics. If you cannot, you need to fall back. First thing is you aviate, you fly the ship. If you cannot do that, and secondary is communicate. If you can't fly, navigate, and communicate, you don't need to worry about combat. You've got to be able to just do those as muscle memory before you start adding in the combat layers, or you're going to break down when the situational awareness bucket starts overflowing. And that's the mistake we see a lot of pilots making, is that they, even in Star Citizen, where, the game isn't a high-end simulator. It's a very great game. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's no Falcon 4 BMS, and where you have to memorize hundreds of pages of information to be successful. But it is, it is big enough that situational awareness bucket, when it starts to overflow, bad stuff happens.
And those are skills that, whatever the latest meta is, which I think some of the things we're working on are independent of that. Those
has to be.
Yeah, right. But that bucket is still going to be there, and it's going to be able to adapt to whatever's going on quicker. So yes, I agree. That's the biggest key. I know for me, like I said, just in that one experience, just trying to get adapted, even building my bucket up specific to that role in Star Citizen was different than all the other flying I do.
Yep. So Himdall asks a question before we move on to the next segment of decoupled combat is exhilarating. Love SC in that respect. I'd like to point out, and Josh, let's kind of just go through the table here with some folks. But when we're looking at these examples, none of these pilots, with the exception of the OP4, the one guy, is really strafing hardly at all, and none of them are going decoupled, except for the OP4. Is that correct?
As far as I understand it, I think they may have used some decouple bits. It's very little. It is not the majority of what they're doing.
When I debriefed them, they were not decoupling. They were doing non-blind strafing, i.e. they could see where they were strafing to.
Yep.
But they were not decoupling at all.
No, and look, decouple may have some place in the future, and we could always take a look at it. But I can tell you, as someone trying to be a wingman keeping up, you start doing some radical decouple stuff, and I'm going to get very separated from you. I'm not going to be able to be a good wingman. So, is it exhilarating to do on your own? Yeah, so are a lot of things. But when you're trying to work as a team, it looks very, very different. And I think some people that are playing this solo or in small groups, when this game goes live and they start to see the reality and maybe the imposing reality and limitations that there are working in those smaller groups. I'm going to feel for them because this is not going to be something you're going to solve quickly.
The only thing I'm very careful about throwing decoupled combat aside. I mean, it is a feature of this game.
It is.
It doesn't exist in other
Yep.
simulators out there. And if you know how to do it well, it's going to give you a huge advantage. Now, Josh, you and I have talked about this quite a bit in the past. You know, tactical formation flying isn't a welded wing.
Nope.
It never ever happens that way. You're spread out
Nope.
very far.
Yep.
And maybe if to take advantage of this decoupled flying means you have to get even further apart from each other, or better communication or something. But it's something that we must include in our tactics.
Absolutely. And I will
That's
say
step
this.
one, but it has to be in there.
I will say this. We had an overarching concept that was passed down and I think slightly looked at, years ago. And we went to apply it and we had to morph it and we had to change it and we had to adapt to what was happening there. In the future, I think that that's going to happen again. I do believe that decoupled flight and experimentation with it will work. The biggest thing I think that we have to be cognizant of is finding out what works. And I'm never against whatever. In fact, one of the guys in our training was like, well, we're not doing what was told to us about this concept. And I said, it doesn't matter. We're winning.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah, a little ways. But
Yeah,
let me
we
let me ask you, Josh,
hold on a
Josh,
second. Go ahead, and I'll turn it over to you, Charlie. They took a concept that we have been developing on paper and with some basic testing, and the changes to the game required them to make some modifications, but it is very similar to the on paper concept. The changes that they have made are tweaks that make it more effective. And so they did a great job with basically getting a classroom instruction on, here are things that you should be considering. Here's a tactic to go test. And then they took that tactic. It worked against AI fairly well. But when we put them against other higher end players, it fell apart and they had to modify it.
Yep.
And the cool thing is the modifications they've made works against AI and lower end players even better.
Yep.
So it's been good. Turning over to you.
No, I had a question during the decoupled piece to Josh or Jolly because do you think that decoupling would be some way that you could work on your energy management, perhaps, or would that be some place to put it in?
I mean,
you're changing the parabola of the you're trying to cut it short, come around, or trying to alter your trajectory quicker, perhaps, or
I'll say this from the little bit of testing I've done with it. If I want to turn around 180 degrees and start heading the other direction, it's faster for me to decouple, spin around, and hit the afterburner and my rear engines, which are stronger, than by trying to slow down with my front reverse thrusters and then turn around. So yeah, I do think there is some place for it. Like I said, I will try anything to beat you because I'm just a competitive bastard. So I'll throw anything in there.
But not turning your fighter into a turret.
No.
Stationary turret.
No.
That's not what we're talking about.
So
Way to die.
what
One
we
thing,
saw,
this goes to what Josh was talking about EM. If I'm flying along and I decouple, spin 180 to continue to fire at you, maintain the same direction, okay, that's good. I'm gauging you longer than I could have. If I had to then gauge my thrusters, slow myself down, all we talked about, that potential kinetic energy, I'm now at zero.
Yep.
Because now you're a stationary target out there. Stuff like that we have to be very careful about as for when's the proper time to re-engage. Go on, spin around, shoot, spin back where I'm going the same direction. But right now, I haven't lost any of my kinetic energy, so I'm still good to go. So it's stuff like that we're going to need to get developed into it.
Yeah, that's a great way to
Absolutely.
overheat your engines too.
well, one thing to keep in mind that we saw here was when the person that was doing radical maneuvers lost kinetic energy, they were very vulnerable to missile fire.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Very vulnerable to missile fire. So a circle strafe or doing a maneuver that cost them to lose kinetic momentum was placing them at super high risk of taking a missile. And the opponents, the guys that were using the modified boom and zoom, they learned very quickly that as soon they'd lock the target with a missile, and as soon as they saw them start to slow down, they'd fire a missile whether it hit or not, because it forced that person into a flee mode, and they didn't get to make another attack. They weren't able to successfully complete an attack because they were massively defensive, and the missile was right on top of them, and they died to a couple of missile strikes. So that's the thing that I think that you have to be cautious when you talk about strafing and you talk about decouple. Decouple definitely has a place. I'm not saying you can never use it. I'm just saying it's dangerous when you're in a group to do radical maneuvers like that blindly. That's blindly being the key word. And the other is it's dangerous because it's very easy to lose focus and lose kinetic momentum, kinetic energy in your flight path, and make you extremely susceptible to missile fire. So that's just one thing. Does that make sense, Jolly?
Yeah, all I'm saying is I'm going along and I decouple. Hand up here. I decouple, and so I turn and keep straight shooting at you. That's fine. That's good.
Yep.
Now, if I want to go back, I need to go back to my vector, which we get an indicator on.
Yep.
And then
Right.
couple. I have not lost any of my kinetic energy whatsoever.
Correct.
But if I go like this and try to shoot then turn, couple, hit my afterburners, I'm going to go down to 0 kinetic energy and I'm dead.
Yeah.
Correct. And what we saw was they would go into a hard strafe because the boom and zoom opponents would push onto them when they decoupled because they realized, okay, split and hit him from the sides. And when that happened, they were like moving sideways and would have to re-engage their engines. And as they did that turn to try to re-engage the guys that had split them, one of them, they would slow almost to a stop to start to engage them. And when they did that, they were very vulnerable. So in a perfect world, decouple has its place. You've just got to be really on top of stuff to look for that situation where you can decouple, engage, and then flip back around and escape or break, in a way that you can come back around and hit them.
Absolutely.
Nam, what are your thoughts on all of this before we move on to the next, the training aspects of it and things like that?
Can't really add much to that. As far as the physics in the game, we're all just trying to find the tools that work in the game. It doesn't matter what should work. It's what does work. But it's like trying to make a hard turn without decoupling. For whatever reason, the pitch seems like the pitch is always much stronger than yaw, and it doesn't overheat anywhere near as fast.
Yeah, rolling and pitching is faster than yawing.
Right.
There's no question about that. Turing, anything you want to add before we move on to the next portion?
Nope.
It's Shapcap.
The only thing I would add is that all this decoupling talk and if you're going to do it, you got to be right on the money, because to Jolly's point, you either decel to 0 and have to mash on your afterburners to get out, which means you're probably going to overheat. And one thing I've noticed is that even with just one overheat on your engine, you can cause a lingering issue in your ship that'll put you to disadvantage in a fight. Like the what do they call it, where the thrusters act erratic.
You get the imbalance.
Imbalance.
Yeah,
you get the imbalance. Yeah. So
That's
training. Keep that from happening.
Here's the thing to remember that we would, and I think all of us would agree, I'll double check with Jolly. Decoupling has its place. You've got to master a lot of other stuff before you even think about it, because there's a lot of, the skill set to be able to do all of that stuff while decoupled and not put yourself in a hole is a lot harder than not decoupling and fighting as a team. Jolly, I think you would agree with that.
I agree.
It's level of training.
It's down the road a little bit before you get into it, but it must be in there eventually. It's like
Yep.
EM weapons. You don't want to
Advanced
start
tactics.
off with EM weapons.
Okay.
But we need them eventually.
Yep.
So, Josh, let's talk about this last bullet point that you have here real quick, because I think this is going to be a little bit controversial.
Yeah, so some people can get upset, and you can yell at me on Twitter or here or wherever. But in looking at this, I use a HOTAS, so I'm biased perhaps, and I have one stick, and I have a dual throttle, but it's one throttle really, right? And so I fly in a more traditional, conventional way that you might think of for a fighter jet. And, we're looking at for this org being able to look at a standard graph of ability and data set and a bell curve. And we're trying to get the average pilot to be better by working together, having good comms and all these things. But really, what this is, the question that has to be asked is a lot of people out there that are showing videos and streaming of their dual stick setups and their 1v1, really capable of a knife fight in a telephone booth, as Jay puts it. There's a place for that if that's what you want to do. But if you want to be in game and effective as a group, you have to ask the question, does dual sticks really matter? And is there an advantage? And I'm going to say, I don't think so for your average pilot. I think that it is harder, in talking to the person who is using dual sticks, it is harder to manage your speed changes. It's harder to stay in formation. Circle strafe is less effective than it used to be for avoiding fire. Transverse velocity seems to be pretty good, but the actual circle strafing. Now, when it comes to straight up aiming, there's probably some advantage. But, we've talked about before where we thought dual sticks might be an advantage, but it'd be very hard and it'd be fatiguing if you're going to be in a 30 or 40-minute flight before you get to combat because they are more fatiguing. But now I have to really ask the question, is dual sticks really the way to go in Star Citizen, considering that everything we have seen says that a larger org and working together as a group is going to be probably the better way? And sure, there's going to be extreme outliers and people that develop that skill. But I think for your average pilot and your average person, dual sticks is the wrong way. So I'd love to hear everyone's input, whether it's in chat or wherever. But from the testing we've seen, I think dual stick is in question now.
Well, and let's be clear. We're talking about for fighters, light
Yes.
fighters, medium fighters.
Yes.
Jolly, what are your thoughts on the dual stick? Do you think
I've never flown dual stick, so it's tough for me to make a judgment on it. What I would say is, based on what I have seen, there's a progression of complexity in the controls. Easiest being keyboard and mouse. And a step up from that would be a HOTAS. And I would think as a step above that would be a dual stick. But it's not something I would not jump into it. I don't think I have the skill set to be able to jump in and fly dual stick. HOTAS, sure, but not dual stick. So if you've been doing it for eons and eons, as you said, outliers, guys who are really good at dual sticks, and they're flying dual sticks for quite some time, they know it. They've gotten used to it by now.
Yep. Well, and I point out that the person that we were using as Op4 here is a dual sticker. He's one of the best. And two fairly novice HOTAS users were able to hold their own or defeat him 2v1. So, I mean, that is something to keep in mind. Turing, what are your thoughts on dual sticks as we talk about
Well,
this?
like Charlie, I've never flown with dual sticks. My muscle memory is with a HOTAS setup, so it'd be very difficult for me to do it. I just think it's more intuitive, like Heimdall says on the chat. I think it's just more intuitive to use the throttle setup. It seems I can get more finer control on my speed that way, and speed control is your number one issue when you're trying to maintain your formation. And I don't mean locking it in a diamond, but I mean in your place within the loop as you're trying to turn and go back. You have to be able to do that speed control. I just think it's more intuitive and easier to pick up if you have a standard HOTAS setup. But again, there are players that's what they do, and they do it very, very well. And I'm sure even there will be mouse and keyboard players, Jay, that might be able to do it very, very well if they know how to do it.
I am sure that there are some weird animals out there that are capable of that. But I'm not that. More power to them if they can, because that's a pretty big feat. Nam, what are your thoughts on dual sticks? Talk about light fighters again.
I don't disagree with what's been said at this point, that it's like you're always going to have your outliers that once they get the skill set, they can just kill with it. I mean, but you can hear about some savant out there that's playing a first-person shooter with a joystick. So you can teach yourself to control anything with just about anything. But it's where the money is the one thing we haven't really mentioned is you're starting to buy all these dual sticks. It's hard to get a hold of the sets we usually recommend. So now people are going to VKB and the other brands that are popping up and coming up with some really good stuff now. But
yeah, but you're
It's a matter of
$500
where's
in
your
the
money
hole.
best. What?
You're
Yeah.
$500 in the hole. For a
Right,
dual stick
exactly.
setup.
So that's the thing is how much. I mean, unless you got just money's no object. Where's your money best spent? You get yourself. You start out with mouse keyboard, then you get a HOTAS. Before you move on to something like dual stick and putting all that money into it, your money's better spent towards getting a track IR for having better situational awareness, getting a set of
Definitely.
pedals so you have better overall control of the ship. Then move on to if you got the extra cash to spend and you feel like doing it, then go into dual stick and stuff because there's a lot of money involved when you really get into this.
And again, we're approaching this from the perspective of working as a team, flying
Yep.
as a team, not as individuals. Shap, anything you want to add to this?
No, I'm just
dual
going to
sticks?
echo what other people have said. I think you got to fly with what you're comfortable with.
Oh,
A
master.
recommendation is just that. It's a recommendation, not a requirement. But like I'm a mouse and keyboard guy. I'm not ready to go to a stick setup. And like we've already said, nobody's saying throw your dual stick out the window and replace it. But, there are some advantages that we can see to the general population, not necessarily, a use case. Like I am Bot 5, for example, in chat, went the other way. He started with a HOTAS and went to a dual stick. Or I'm sorry, or they started with the HOTAS and went to a dual stick. So, it's all about what you can fly with and what you're effective with, but where it plays in or comes to play for us is your ability to use those tools going to help or hinder our mission. Like if we have to give you a wide berth because you need more room to swing because you're less precise with your controls console,
That's a problem.
it's a problem for sure.
Yep.
So, there's a little bit of, you have to conform to, for the good of the org, but there's also some of like, you got to be comfortable playing the game too. Like if you made me use a HOTAS, I'd fly into a lot of things for a very long time before I got a grip on it. I'm just so used to keyboard. It's natural for me. It's what I've been playing with since I was, 12. So,
Well,
anyways, those are my thoughts.
And no judgment on anybody who uses whatever type of controller. I just think that what we're seeing is beginning to ask questions in that arena, especially for working as a group and in a large org. So I think it's been a great experience. Again, the guys in FleetSec who have been working with this and the pilots that have joined us, it has made Star Citizen extremely fun for me. And I appreciate that. We've learned a lot and I'm looking forward to continuing it.
Yeah, and as Kestrel says on here, the key here is practice, practice, practice makes perfect.
Yep.
It's repetition. We're just verbalizing our experience running a large org, seeing a lot of different people. And it seems to me, and I think most of us, that we notice that HOTAS flyers tend to get up the bell curve and to the top of the hill a little bit quicker. And the efficiency differences that a dual stick will bring requires so much more practice to get to the top of that bell curve where you can fly and stay and work together as a team, that it's a tough thing to sell. So, Joel, any final thoughts before we move on to segment number 3?
No, that's right. One thing you said, the turn. As for used to using HOTAS, it's natural. It really is. But if you're used to flying simulators, not quite there because you're used to the simulator. If I pull aft, I got to increase throttle.
Yep.
Not Star Citizen.
Mhm.
Nope.
Leave throttle alone.
No, you don't.
So there are
Yeah,
some
that's true.
muscle memory things you got to forget when you change
Yeah.
the game over.
Otherwise, you're.
Bad things happen.
Do you
So-
reach for the collective?
Yeah, it's a natural
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
That's what I do.
yeah.
Don't do that.
There you go.
Jolly would really appreciate a collective some days. Anyhow,